Hi, it's Ursula from ursula-smith.com, and today's video is a little bit different than I normally do. First of all, I'm wearing my real hair, but it is, so I have two kind of crafting worlds. First, paper crafting, which is kind of how I got started, and then I morphed into jewelry. I'm still more of a beginner slash intermediate, but every once in a while I'll come across something where I've experimented or tried something. It seems like it might be helpful, and like on the paper crafting world, I used to teach stamping and scrapbooking, and so my friends and family would be like, what did you, there was something that you taught us, and so that's really kind of how I got started. And again, so I if I find something where I think it's helpful, I'm using something very differently than other people use it, that's kind of how I post. And this one, I was in the middle of a challenge, a jewelry challenge, and I don't normally do challenges. It's there's a hard stop, and the way that I work in little bits of time. So a lot of my videos, if you've followed me over the years, they're called Take 5, right? Things that you could do in little bits of time. You may have to come back and do another step, and sometimes for me, that may be weeks, even months later. And so challenges that have a hard stop, especially if it's, I sign up for it and it's only 2 weeks later, that's a no, just a no-go for me personally. But this one was a little bit longer of a period of time, and I've, whatever. I thought I could push my envelope of things that I'm capable of. And it did not go well. And at the same time, I was watching a Netflix show called Younger, and there's a character in the show that is having a really bad year. She writes a book called The F Word, and F for failure. And I was like, oh, yep, that pretty much tracks with this challenge. And so I decided to go back and kind of revisit like all the things I did wrong in this challenge, starting with RTFD. Like, read the freaking directions, which I did when I signed up for it. And then, of course, I forgot, half of what I was supposed to be doing. And so the way that I, again, kind of work is in my downtime when I'm sitting around daydreaming, and I know I want to work on something, like I'll think about it first and kind of work things out in my head. It doesn't always work out in real life, but that's kind of my prep stage, if you will. And so, I was kind of thinking about the things that I might try, again, thinking I only had to do one thing. And I was going to start in pewter, then I was going to redo it in copper and silver, and started the challenge late, by the way. So again, that's another thing. Give yourself plenty of time. And so I started working through this one piece, thinking again, it's the only thing I have to do. So I kind of followed it through. I started trying to push pewter as far as I could possibly take it, and which was interesting to me. And again, if you're a beginner / intermediate jewelry, some of this might be helpful. In any event, I did way too many things wrong. And so if the only thing you take away from this video is if you're having a bad week, just know that you're not alone. So anyway, if you're going to watch the rest of it, thanks for joining me. And here comes the F is for failure. So here's the part of the jewelry challenge that I'm trying to do. And this shot plate came with this pattern plate. And you could use one of the items in a piece. That's all you had to do, was use one of the things. So I was trying to maximize and use as many as I could in the designs. So you'll see the texture plate in the designs, and then you'll see some of the impression dies. I think I ended up using everything but this little piece. And I would have used that little piece, as you'll see in the pendant. I probably should have done it anyway, but I didn't. It was just a little big for what I wanted it for. But you'll see all of these in the designs as we go along. And then I love this die. It's just a bezel, and the middle is plain. So typically what I do is I texture that middle, and you will see that as we go along. But I thought that kind of mirrored this shape. So that, as soon as I saw that piece, I was like, oh, I need to do that. And again, because I didn't read the directions, I thought I only had to do one piece. So I was like, boom, bing, bang, boom, I'm done. And then you'll see as I talk about the piece that I did these two things in, I kind of started going off on a tangent, not realizing that I had to get two other pieces done and get my act in gear. So then I was racing at the end. But in any event, these are the pieces that you will be seeing in the next part of the video. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I wanted to try to use as many of the piece parts as I could that came in the kit. Again, because I didn't I read the directions and forgot and thought I only had to make one piece. So, so the first thing I made was this part of the piece, so the bezel, but fully knowing that I was going to do what I consider kind of the matching piece to it. And the bezel is plain in the middle, usually. And I was trying to decide, a lot of times I texture the middle, and I was trying to decide whether I was going to texture it directly, use the glittery texture, try to use the back plate or the pattern plate. What was I going to do? So what I did was I cut out just a matching inside and then did the glitter texture on that as a kind of to test to see whether I liked it, which I did. And then I pressed a piece from the pattern plate of these little Celtic crosses, sawed that out, and decided to use that as the embellishment in the middle of the bezel over the glittery texture. So I really like that. And then I could do the glittery texture in the middle of the piece from the challenge shot plate and mirror the two, both in shape and enhancement. So I love that idea. When I was pressing, I also used the pattern plate to press the back. And then when it came time to attach, normally I just use a rivet. So it's riveted in place. It's not removable. But I had also pressed a piece of the pattern plate onto a temporary test piece. And so I was kind of going back and forth, and I was like, ooh, if I didn't use a rivet, if I use something that is removable, then I could have interchangeable plates. So I did have micro nuts and screws. And so that's what I decided I was going to use. So you can see just how tiny these things are. So I went off and created a couple more. That's one of my pattern plates that I etched, just a bunch of scrolls. I have stamps and cutouts in that same scroll design. I attached one of the micro screws to the back of the butterfly embellishment so that it could go directly onto the back plate, and then made another one. So I had 3, and if I had tested the attachment mechanism first, I would have just stopped and realized this is not practical, because now my hands are bad from years of computer work and jewelry, and so trying to even just pick up that nut was next to impossible. I ended up having to use pliers. So never in a million years is somebody going to buy this and do that. I'm not even sure I will ever change these out. So I may go ahead and just kind of, either rivet that shut or solder it or whatever. So anyway, it was a cool idea, but completely impractical. So I still uploaded the images of it to the design challenge, but I would consider that kind of a failure. So then when it came time to, and so I just attached the jump rings. So attaching jump rings to bigger pieces, especially using the soft solder, is doable with, I don't have what I call a big girl torch. Kind of freaks me out. So I use those when I take classes, or if I have a woman that lives near me that I can go and pay for a session and use her torch if I need a big girl torch. But in general, I just have a baby, tiny little, like you use it for cooking. And that is big enough to attach a jump ring with a soft solder. And I can control it with a bigger piece. So the jump rings went on pretty well on both the top and bottom of that. And then I was trying to decide what to do with the bail. And originally I thought of trying to cut 2 of these, attach them together, and form a front and back as a bail. But at this point, I'm now like heads down into pewter. I have finally realized that, actually, by this point, I'm not sure I had finally realized. I don't think I had realized. I think I was still under the impression I only had to do 1 piece. Oops, sorry. And so but I'm in the middle of doing all this pewter work. Why don't I just try to push pewter as far as I could go? And so I got this idea of just doing a jump ring and attached a curved piece to that jump ring, kind of as an embellishment of the jump ring. Now, a lot of times I actually use jump rings as bails because, especially for pewter pieces, it's pewter, so people aren't willing to spend gobs of money. And bails add a lot of extra time. And so I generally don't do, unless, whatever, I'm in a sewing mood and I want to see what it looks like. I generally just use simple bails on the pewter pieces. But I thought this might be a way that I could, I still have to do the sawing. It did not. All right. So that was the failure. I kind of like the way it worked, but it was still a ton of work. So that was the failure part of it. The other thing I did test was curving the piece. And so what I ended up using was just a sheet of embossing rubber. And I know if you've watched any of my paper crafting videos, you use the embossing rubber in the die cut machine, like the Sizzix Big Shot. It's just a thin piece of rubber. My next thought is I'm wondering, actually, I have thin urethane made by Pepe Tools that I use all the time in my press, because sometimes I don't need those big wonky pieces of urethane. They flop all over and don't get where I need them to go. So I'm going to pause and go grab this and talk about both pieces. Okay, so this is the embossing rubber that I was talking about. And if you've watched any of my paper crafting videos, I use it all the time for embossing. What I do is when I'm trying to curve something, like in any of the ring benders, I will just kind of put the piece in between and then try to bend it. And sometimes it will cut through, but it usually protects the especially because this is pewter, it's really soft. Usually protects it from getting beaten up too badly. So that's what I did with this piece when I was trying to bend it, and it worked great. This is the other stuff I was talking about. This is urethane, and it's stiffer than the embossing rubber. And so I'm wondering if I could try to make a sandwich. I don't know if I could bend it completely. I might be able to. It's hard with it this way, but in any event, it comes in a sheet. I want to say it's maybe 6 by 6. You cut it with scissors. It works great. If you do maybe 3 stacked together, it's about the same depth as the urethane that we normally use in the press. But a lot of times just using thinner pieces works better. So, when you're struggling, a lot of people use paper. I generally don't use paper or cardboard. Sometimes I use leather. Sometimes I use Yupo paper. It works really great. And then if none of that is working, I will use some of this stuff. And usually this will help before I move on to the urethane. So anyway, just a hint for something else. So that's kind of how I protected this when I was curving it, and it worked great. And then setting up to solder it with a soldering iron was a royal pain, but I did finally get it done. And then it's on there amazingly tight, and so I could reshape it to kind of work with the piece after the fact. And so the cool thing about this bail was, now if I had made it double-sided, it would have worked also, but I was still kind of trying to decide, does this work as a double-sided, with the back being patterned. And then I added that little washer, the copper washer, to kind of make it look like, it's a design. It's kind of plain, so I don't, again, I'm not selling this, but, maybe too plain of a design to use it as a double-sided. But in any event, if anybody did want to, with this idea, the jump ring can flip over, and now the design, because it looks good either direction, can be flipped over, and so you have the bail on the other side as well. So there was lots of stuff I was trying on this piece, and I'm thinking I have all the time in the world, only to then find out as I start taking pictures that I needed to do 2 more pieces. So I will talk about those in the next couple of videos. So here is the second project that I did with the impression die challenge. And this one actually, I did make some mistakes. So I'll show you the first go round of these little drop things and, what I did that I didn't like. And then the way I did the ear wires is I soldered a wire to the back. I don't know if you can see it in there. Focus is not working. It should be cleaned up a little bit. So I haven't gotten to that part yet. And then I'm trying to decide. So originally my thinking was I might be able to work this where you could slide off the dangle and slide another pair on. But then the wires will get wonky, so that it's not a feasible thing to sell. But for me, since I can tweak it, I might be able to do it. So I haven't decided if I were going to actually make these to sell, I would probably wire wrap this part closed. So I'm probably going to end up doing that because I don't know that I'd actually really change things out. But that's the second attempt, at least of the bottom part. And then so these were made out of pewter. Again, I was going to do this whole thing in pewter and then do it again in real base metals, but never, I just am running out of time. And so what I did I did the dazzly texture on the bottom. And then on the top, I wanted to do something so it wasn't just completely plain. And it's pewter, so I can't enamel. I can't do anything with high heat. So what I ended up doing was I just used some stain. It's, I can't think of it. Hold on. Okay, I thought of it as soon as I paused. It's vintage. This is not obviously not the color I used. And when they first came out, they were paints, so they were opaque. But then they came out with some stains. And so that's what I used inside. And then it was kind of dull, like inset into, come on, focus. Inset into that little tiny space. And so I just added a drop of resin over the top. A, it protects it, and B, it makes it a little shinier. So, and then these were the first go round, like my first official test piece for this part. And this is why I ended up switching to the soldering iron, because trying to use a torch on teeny tiny things that you're attaching, you just end up with bigger blobs of solder and a lot more cleanup. So with the soldering iron, there was a lot less cleanup that I had to do. So anyway, it worked out better. It was a little easier. So you just literally touch the jump ring and it ends up, I just put a little chip of solder onto the jump ring and kind of, so these were trimmed, the jump ring was trimmed on either side to slide the pewter piece in between, rather than soldering just a whole jump ring onto the back, where you end up with a bigger blob. So, and then I just put a little tiny piece of solder on either side, melted or heated up the jump ring, which melted the solder. So that worked great. Kind of the same thing on the back with the wire. So the wire was straight when I did it, and I just touched the wire. It's a thin enough silver wire that it just went through quick and melted the solder. And then I just used the soldering iron to kind of smooth it out a little bit. Boy, really hard to see. This one's been cleaned up a little bit better, so can't really see the solder, but it's there. So anyway, that is the deal with the earrings. And then, like I said, originally I was thinking of switching and so this was my test case for the vintage stains. A little bit of a different color, because then there was another color that added that kind of blue purpley, which kind of is cool. So that's when I was thinking, ooh, maybe I can make these changeable. But I think I'm just gonna leave them, because quite frankly, I don't feel like going through and cleaning up all that solder in such a tiny space. So those will just be test pieces, and I will probably wire wrap this earring, because then I can add a little touch of copper to go along with the touches of copper in the other two pieces. So those, again, are the earrings. Okay, so these are how the earrings turned out. So I ultimately decided I was going to leave the bottom plain. I didn't want to fill in with the sparkly texture going on. I ended up adding little copper discs. Originally, I was going to add in the copper because I kind of had copper going on in, the little embellishments on the pendant. And so I wanted to pull in copper in the earrings as well. And originally I was going to do copper wire wrap, but I didn't like the look of that. And so I went with the copper washers, and I did wire wrap the earrings stems closed. I decided I'm not going to change out the dangles. And the ear wire is very thin. It would never work to sell it that way anyway. In fact, if I were to do this over again, I probably wouldn't even do this design, this ear wire design. I'm not a huge ear wire person anyway, but if I were going to do the ear wire, I probably would solder the whole wire directly to this piece and then just shape, the loop in the back rather than having that kind of free. So anyway, lesson learned on that one. It was able to salvage it, and they came out okay. So those are the results of the earrings. Okay, so this is the third piece that I decided to make. I loved this shape right here. I thought it would look cool on the end of a ring. And so, and then I kind of wanted it to be adjustable, so I used this piece on the other side. Both of these are made from pewter. I used the diamond tip to give that sparkly texture on this piece. And so what I ended up doing, and this is, so this is what I learned from this. I used half round, and I really had to use like a stiffer material than pewter. So I used half round silver here, but I used it kind of inside out, if you will. So the round part is on the inside, and then the flat part is on the outside. And I do that a lot of times because I personally think it's more comfortable that way. And then it makes it easier to attach things to the top. Sorry, about to drop the phone. But what I learned on this one is I cheaped out because I wasn't sure this was going to work out. And so I used thinner gauge material for the ring. I think this was maybe 10 gauge or 12. It might have been 12 gauge half round. I really needed a thicker gauge for what I was trying to do. And the other thing that I did wrong, if you will, is this piece I attached. So I touched both pieces when the wire was flat, and it went on great. I used a soldering iron and did a halfway decent job. I mean, I haven't finished this because I'm not going to end up using it, but a halfway decent job. It feels fine when it's on my finger. Oops. Hold on. Sorry about that. Good thing I have that bench skirt, the tray to catch everything. So it feels good when it's on, but what I did was I attached everything when the wire was flat, and then I shaped the ring. And so what ended up happening was this piece attached to the ring really didn't round as nicely as I would have liked it to. And so I wasn't crazy about that. Tried to work with it a little bit. The wire, because it was so thin, kind of got wonky and twisty and whatever. Doesn't look great. And then the last thing, but I kept going forward because, this was a test piece and I really wanted to see where it was going to go. And so the last thing that I did was I thought, that'd be nice with a bezel in the center of that kind of V shape. And so that went on fine, but so I can't reshape it after the bezel is attached because that would make the bezel wonky and the stone wouldn't fit. But it's flat. So if I had bigger fingers, it probably would be okay, because then the ring would, the stone would be flat across a wider finger. But on my finger, that bezel really kind of needed to be curved a little bit more. So when I attached it, I should have attached it more along that rounded curve, and then I think it would lay better. So anyway, lots of different things that I learned from this piece. And so one of the next things I'm going to try is using, well, I'm just going to switch to copper, whatever. I forgot that I had half round copper, which is why I didn't use it to begin with. And so this is a thicker gauge. It's 8 gauge. And I formed the ring first, and then I'm going to press that shape again and form that on the curve and try to attach it that way. I think it's going to be a little more difficult, but I'm going to give it a shot. And then the other thing I did was so the pewter pieces I make a little bit thicker so that they don't, pewter just isn't as stiff, and it's just a little softer than copper or silver. And so I typically try to make the pieces a little bit thicker so that they don't kind of go bendy when you're wearing it. And so with the thickness of the pewter piece, I wanted a little less thickness on the ring part. And so all I did was I sanded down some flat spots on the top, to make it thinner, and hopefully it will attach more easily. I mean, this is going to be crazy trying to set this up. And I am going to try to do it with a soldering iron. So when I am finished with it, I will be back. So just a quick thing. I just wanted to let you know, this is what I use, the Stay Bright. It comes in a kit, with the solder and the flux. And a lot of times I brush on the flux rather than dousing it, just because I'm working with, different metals, precariously placed. And if there's too much solder, it starts to bubble and things move. And then the other thing that I do is, if you can see, nope, that is the end. So I use both ends. So one end I just use to pick up the solder with the soldering iron. And then the other one I hammer flat so that it's flat, so it doesn't roll around. And I then cut little pieces. So like when I'm first attaching the embellishments to the ring band, I use the flat pieces, and then I'll use the regular other end with the soldering iron like you would normally do. And where is I'm trying to show you the cutters. Oh, there they are. So these are just regular solder cutters, and they cut great. You just kind of stick the solder in between the two pieces, and it acts like scissors, and then the pieces fall out the bottom. So I didn't know about a solder scissors when I first started out, and it drove me nuts not having something like that. So I wanted to show you that. And then hold on. Okay, as always, the setup is the most precarious thing. And so what I did was I used a soft soldering block, and I already had the hole for something else, and it worked okay for this. So I just put the ring kind of, or the embellishment into that little hole, and then use some tweezers to kind of hold the ring base in place. That will be a heat sink, and so sanding off the top of the ring also to make it thinner will also make it easier for the heat to get through with the soldering iron. And this is the soldering iron that I use. Where is it? Right here. I forget how you say the name, like pensile, I think. So it's super tiny, but it does get hot. And so what I typically do is I go hotter than the melting point of the pewter. I usually set it to about 550, and that will heat up the copper enough to kind of make it through to the solder underneath and onto the pewter. And that does seem to work. So I'm going to go off and do that. And when it's done, I will be back. Just to show you where I'm at. So I have all the pieces attached. It still needs lots and lots of cleanup. So basically what I try to do is tack and melt and then spread the solder, and then I can go back in later and do some cleanup rather than trying to use the soldering iron to get as smooth a finish as I possibly can, especially since I'm working with lots of different pieces. If you overheat, you may lose the position of one or the other. Everything keeps melting, heating up the ring. So in any event, that's how I do it. Again, I am not the best solderer. So, and then the other thing was with the bezel, I was trying to use the soldering iron on like the outside, like right here, to heat up the bezel to have it basically melt into the pewter piece, which worked great, except then I was left with a little hint of solder on the outside. I should have left it and then gone in and just cleaned it up later. But then I was like, oh, maybe I'll just do like almost like a two-tone look and put solder around. And that was a lesson learned, not doing that again. I'm just going to do the cleanup next time because I still have to do cleanup and it's going to be hard. And whatever, I just wouldn't do it that way again. The rest of it, I feel like it may turn out okay, like I said, once I do the cleanup. So when that is finished, I will be back. Okay, I just wanted to catch you up where I am at. So I started to go on to the last step and forgot to do this part, but here's how it ended up after cleanup. Again, if I weren't under the gun trying to get this thing done today, I would go back in and try and fill in a little bit more with solder so that I could make a little bit smoother transitions between the copper and the pewter pieces. Again, like I said earlier, this I would make rounder. I'd bend the whole thing rather than just trying to do this piece, this little end piece. And then the other thing I would definitely pay attention to is how big I make that flat spot, because I didn't push the ring part all the way to the end of the pewter piece, which I should have. Sorry. Come on. It's like barely at the end. I should have moved the band, all the way down towards the end, and then you wouldn't see that flat spot. It would just look better. So I wasn't paying attention when I did that, unfortunately. But other than that, the ring kind of fits better with that curve in it. The bezel is going down a little bit more on the curve, so I feel like it won't catch as much. And now I'm just adding sparkly texture. You can see I've already kind of started that. And then probably final polishing, cleanup, and put the stone in. And that will be that. So that is the ring. So the other thing that maybe people don't know about is an agate burnisher. And I love this thing because you just run it along an edge and it just brings up the shine, and it doesn't mar your metal. So even on the pewter pieces, I don't know if you can see on the edge, it's so hard to show shine, even in videos, but that little piece, it just brought up that edge. And then even on this piece, I ran it along. So this, it kind of has geometric sides to it. I love the shape of it. And I just ran it along the edges so you can kind of see those sides to the piece. So anyway, if you've never heard of an agate burnisher, it's something you should look up. And yeah, I love it. All right, so here's project number 3. This is where I finally ended up with it. I think I left you and I was still trying to figure out, was I gonna texture the top little doodad? And I ultimately decided, no, I'm just gonna leave it. But I did end up texturing that flat space, and then I added a little bit of texture there, so just a little more glittery onto the copper, so it kind of looks like I meant to do it. Not really, but so again, lots of things that I learned on this one. Definitely, again, if I were going to do this, I would pay attention to where I was attaching the embellishment and make sure that it covered that flat spot. I would definitely round this embellishment, the whole thing, not just this portion of it. I probably would try to make this maybe a little bit thinner if I could, or sand out some so it's not quite as thick on top. And then if I had had more time, I definitely would have gone in with some more solder so that there weren't, pieces of the copper peeking through once I did the cleanup. And I think there may be ridges somewhere. Yeah. So, bringing the solder all the way to the end, so that it doesn't look quite as wonky. This side was a little bit better. And then that time I did get the bezel on the curve. So on my old fingers, it just fits a little bit better, so it's not standing up and going to catch on anything. So I'm going to play around. Somebody commented when I did post in the challenge group that this is called a bypass ring. And I really like the way this is working. So I'm definitely going to be doing some exploration using this type of design. My goal this year is to do more rings and bracelets anyways. And I want to try to focus on adjustable rings, because I have a lot of friends with big knuckles, because they are older and have arthritis. And so trying to get rings on, and just, when you're selling, a lot of people, they don't have perfect sizes, right? So if you could tweak it a little bit, having adjustable designs is just better for selling too. So anyway, again, I wouldn't sell this, but a lot of lessons learned on this one. And this was really the one where, I started using the soldering iron on the earrings, and this one was really, really where I had to kind of try and not master it, because obviously you can't master it in a day, but I really was trying to push it beyond where I had ever gone before. And so this was great practice for trying to use a soldering iron to attach big, thicker pieces to each other. So anyway, that about wraps it up for all the things I learned in this jewelry challenge, starting with read RTFD,
Read the freaking directions from the beginning so you know what you're doing. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I know this is a long video. I appreciate you sticking around. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time.